Hey everybody, I'm Jody Vance.
And I'm Maclean K.
And it's time for...
Spun. Unspun.
Oh, you nailed it.
I have been planning that for months.
Wow. It only took us to UnSpun 72 to have a Bond reference. George is going to need to step up his game, man. I was wondering, though, do I call you Shaq for this, Maclean? Because Jordan Bateman, your usual partner on BC Poly Hot Stove, was like, finally, I'm unshackled.
And we saw what happened.
Yeah.
It's, I'm proud to be Jordan shackled. Somebody has to be. And I thought George did a great job shackling Jordan.
I thought so too. Boy, did Jordan ever want to talk about a certain mayor.
Yes.
He has a nickname from you that I think is probably the best of all time. I laughed out loud. I spat my tea across the room when I heard you say it.
Mayor McDreamy.
Well, Mayor McDreamy.
He's a handsome man.
We're talking about Brad West, the mayor of Port Coquitlam, in the news over the last, it's been a couple of weeks now, and George and I kept trying to fit it into UnSpun, and at the end we'd go, oh God, we forgot to talk about the whole Brad West being a lobbyist for the Steelworkers Union in the U.S. First of all, Maclean, how did we find out about this?
You know what? Charlie Smith, who is the editor of the Georgia Straight, had done some digging. We knew that he had the job before, but we didn't, what was news last week, I guess, was the salary, which I've now forgotten, but it's somewhere in the area of $130,000. I mean, US. So he's doing okay. But we knew that he had a position with the Steelworkers, but I don't think we knew what the salary was, and we didn't know what his job description was. And to me, I think that's where, if there is a problem, that's where it is. It involves political activities, that's fine, and lobbying.
See, and therein lies the piece, because I've actually spoken with Brad West about how he continued to be, quote unquote, on the payroll. Granted, I didn't say, how much do you get paid, Brad? Yeah. But the way he explained it to me was like, it's a placeholder, because he's going to be the mayor for an amount of time. And then when he is finished with his public service, he will then go back to his day job. Things look different, however, when the day job description dovetails the way it does. And yet, I've watched Mayor McDreamy, Brad West, Wild West do a bunch of really good things in Port Coquitlam that didn't have anything to do with steelworkers or what have you. But when Jordan started breaking it down, when Jordan Bateman, I highly recommend that you follow both Maclean K and Jordan Bateman on Twitter. Hello, and George _, got to get that in, Affleck. Because the way Jordan sort of explained it, you could tell that he was really frustrated with it all because he doesn't like that. But I read your column. Can you give, obviously everyone's going to go to the orca.ca to read it, but give a synopsis of your column on Brad West and the straight line to the United Steelworkers of America.
Well, it's one of those, I had a reaction like Jordan in that my first reaction was not to react. It is not uncommon at all for municipal politicians to have side jobs, even if they are full-time jobs, because as you say, they are not going to be mayor or whatever forever. Now, the way you described it, it sounds like Mayor West described it as like he's almost on leave. I'm not sure if that's the case. I think he's still getting paid. Yeah. But the more you look at the details, the more you start going, it's a full-time job. It's a very political job. The steelworkers, the biggest competition is China. A lot of where Mayor West has made news has been the opposition to UBCM having meetings sponsored by China, which I agree with. But,
and that's the piece, right, Maclean? Because a lot of what he's been doing, you agree with, and then unless you look at the fact that the biggest steel supplier on the planet, other than the US, is China. Yeah. And then it's like, oh, wait a minute.
And the big problem, though, is that the job description that was posted with the U.S. Tax Office was that it involves lobbying, his job. The mayor should not be lobbying. Now, he was asked about it. He says he doesn't lobby, and that's not really part of his job. And, that's probably true. It's probably the case that it's an outdated job description. But it's out there in black and white, and it does say that the job involves lobbying. And so I think that it's fair, and I think reasonable to ask questions. And I actually don't know that he has answered them to everyone's satisfaction yet, but I mean, I'm not accusing him of anything. I really do think that the simplest explanation is that the job description is outdated and it needs to be cleared up.
And that piece is the thing that only Mayor Brad West can do, is to truly clear it up.
Yeah.
And if it's just a simple answer, fair enough. But kudos to Charlie Smith for doing the digging. And I think this goes even further at this time that in a pandemic, where local news media is very, very important, and one of the many reasons why I'm proud to be a part of the Orca. I want to pick your brain, if we could, about COVID-19 a little bit, Maclean.
Yeah.
You work in the BC legislature. You know all of the people who are part of the political machine that is BC politics, both sides of the aisle, well-versed, you know, you're connected. Have you ever seen anything like this to bring those two sides together in such a nonpartisan way, at least giving us the illusion of that?
No, that is the short answer. I worked in Ottawa for the Prime Minister for 9/11, during 9/11.
Really?
And yes, I was in the Prime Minister's office when that happened, and I will tell you all about my experience of that day another time.
I want that.
It was not a great day, as you can imagine, but
yes.
Obviously politics was placed on hold after 9/11 as well, but I don't recall it being quite so unanimous, if you like, as what we're seeing now here, just in BC. I don't remember things like, there was a health town hall with the Minister Adrian Dix and the critics from the BC Liberal and Green Party, respectively. I don't remember anything like that happening in Ottawa. Again, politics were set aside for a while, but here, there's been some sort of sniping on the sidelines as per usual, but it's been amazing how much they've been able to shelve their differences on health and put together a united front. It's really, it does us all credit, I think.
I agree with you on that one. And I'm so proud always to be Canadian, but specifically and in particular to be a British Columbian every day when we see Minister Dix and our provincial health officer, Dr. Bonnie Henry, step up and give us our updates. And how, in watching CBC national news, when I tune into that's my 24-hour news network, and how they'll come to BC for just this much of our update. Yeah. And then they go away and I see the rest of it. And I think, boy, Canada could really benefit from the Q&A. It's so different here. And that's not a shot at CBC. That's more, I wish that the whole picture in British Columbia could be shared, as opposed to the little snippets where they look at our case numbers and then they go, but they've only really tested 77% of, it's like, but wait, like, there's nothing in the community right now. Like everybody can get tested now. Like I just want there to be more of the success story that really does start with our politicians stepping up and looking out for the best interests in the immediate of the citizens of this province. And yes, we're going back, I'm sure, to politics that is like gunslinging, mudslinging is probably a better way of putting it. But just right now, I mean, the praise that Adrian Dix is receiving is really quite something. And what's your perspective on that?
I think it's healthy. It's I think it's very mature, actually, in that it's perfectly possible for, you mentioned Adrian Dix. You can say, if you are a supporter of the BC Liberals or Greens, or just not a fan of the NDP, that, yeah, on the balance, Adrian Dix has done a pretty good job. That's not a blank check. It's not an across the board an endorsement, but you can do that as a grown-up and still say, oh, well, I think they've done a good job on this, but on this file, I have some problems with, and I want to ask you some questions about it. And I think you made a mistake here. Yeah. You don't have to be black and white. In fact, that's not the way the world works, and that's not how governments work. They can be strong in some areas and weak in the other. But unfortunately, the way politics has worked in this province and elsewhere is that people and parties and governments are either, universally great or universally bad. And that's obviously not the case.
It isn't the case. What are some of the things that might be happening behind the scenes that are, or at the legislature, that are being eclipsed by COVID-19? I mean, all of those stories that we were following so closely, whether it be the happenings within the BC legislature, there's that,
yes.
Plus what was happening with the Coastal GasLink pipeline and the Wet'suwet'en. I mean, where did all those stories go?
Well, I mean, how long do you have? We could talk about the stories that
we have 21 minutes. 21 minutes.
I mean, you mentioned a couple of them, all the goings on in the legislature. There's a security report from Alan Mullen's trip across Canada and the US that we haven't seen yet, that eventually I guess we'll see. That doesn't seem to matter very much anymore. It was just a couple months ago that the legislature was on lockdown because of angry protests outside. I guess that story is, we're going to talk about that because of the MOU eventually with the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. But there's also, there was, again, I could spend the entire podcast talking about the stuff that we're not talking about because of a pandemic, and it's perfectly understandable why we're not talking about them. But I feel like when question period resumes, a few of these things are going to get brought up. They're going to bring up, why is an ICBC given driver's rebates if we're all driving?
Hallelujah.
Right? These are fair questions. And it'll be interesting actually to see when the first sort of time, the first moment in the legislature when they remember that, yeah, they really don't like each other that much.
Yeah, when the snowball fight becomes a face wash. Yeah. When it starts to be like, ow. Ooh. But that ICBC piece is a very real. Our listener or viewer might not realize that just about every other province just automatic rebate.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, your insurance is calculated based on your risk. You pay more if you commute every day than as opposed to a weekend car. But I don't know about you. I drive a couple times a month. But my insurance has not gone down. And if you're a daily commuter who commutes by car, your insurance arguably should go down quite a bit. And if we're getting free government aid right now, it stands to reason that a government monopoly would be first in line to offer some relief, but that just hasn't happened here for whatever reason.
What did we miss with regard to the Wet'suwet'en? Can you unpack or unspin for us that just a little? Because I've been covering that story for CKNW and have had opinions on my column in the Orca, and thought I was following along pretty closely, and I'm very confused now.
I think part of the problem is that the Wet'suwet'en system of internal governments is complicated. And it seems to be kind of evolving and changing in real time. Again, none of these are criticisms. Our system of government is complicated, but the difference is we all kind of implicitly understand the differences between powers. And we don't seem to understand collectively how the Wet'suwet'en have decided to organize themselves in terms of roles and responsibilities. And there seems to be some disagreement within the Wet'suwet'en.
There seems to be.
Yeah, which I keep pronouncing wrong, and I need to do better there. It's actually Wet'suwet'en.
Yes.
And thank you.
You're welcome.
But over the last couple of weeks, there was an MOU signed between the federal government, provincial government, and 5 Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs who had assured the provincial government and the federal government that they would go back, do some internal ratification, some consultation, and make sure that this reflects the will of the Wet'suwet'en. That doesn't appear to have happened, or at the very least, there's been some questions about whether it happened at all. And yet, Ottawa, Victoria, they're just going to go ahead and sign the agreement anyway. It's going to lead to more conflict and questions. It's hard to see how it won't.
Seems like short-term gain for long-term pain.
Yeah.
If you don't have the due diligence up front. Because we've already seen when elected chiefs and hereditary chiefs aren't on the same page. It's very divisive in nature and complicated. And that's pretty much what you were saying off the hop. It's not a slight. It's the complexity that just differs from the way our government works, even though ours is very complex in its own right. I wanted one quick Victoria note, if we could. We were talking about the homeless camp in Victoria. What's the update on that there?
Well, yesterday we were told by the Minister, Shane Simpson, that as of, I guess, early this morning, that both of the 2 semi-official camps, because there are more than those 2, will have been cleared, and that everyone who was in them will have been placed into some kind of shelter, be it a converted hotel or the arena here in town. I will be honest, I have not been outside today because I'm staying home and staying safe. So I don't know if that's accurate, but I can tell you that one of those 2 tent cities is literally a block that way, and I'm pointing in the right direction. And the timeline seemed ambitious. I don't know. I would be curious to see if those areas have been cleared. And also, I think there might have been being a little cute with the description. They say, you know, the encampments along Pandora Avenue, which is the street where I'm talking to you from right now. But there's been some spillover into sort of surrounding streets and boulevards that are adjacent on cross streets. I mean, so I'd be shocked. It's, you know, personally, I hope every single one of those people is connected with the service they need, the help they need, and, you know, a place that's safe. But I also hope that we finally have learned our lesson that tent cities are not a solution. No. Because the crime and that we have seen around here it's jarring. There's a grocery store literally across the street from the Pandora Avenue camp. You talk to the staff there, because that's where we buy groceries, and I mean, they're legitimately traumatized. They've been threatened. You know, it's terrible. And all the theft we've seen, the vandalism, it's not great. Now, this is not saying that, you know, we should just sweep the problem away and ignore it and move it to somewhere else. But whatever solution we arrive at, tent cities can't be part of the solution anymore. It doesn't work.
Well, you're sounding an awful lot like George Affleck. So why, you know, why did we swap partners here? No, the perspective on Victoria is really important because we are so Vancouver centric often on UnSpun podcast, because we are staring down Oppenheimer Park on the downtown east side. Certainly it went from a homeless camp to a war zone. Like you talk about, I feel for those people at the grocery store across on Pandora Avenue. The way things have unfolded here, and deaths, you know, guns, weapons, snakes and machetes, like it's been a horror show here. And there's still that core group of 15 or 20 activists that are not interested at all in housing. They have a mission to disrupt. And now they're just down the road at Crab Park. So what do you do with Crab Park? Like, you know, people were talking about Stanley Park being closed to traffic during the pandemic, to street traffic, and then cyclists can use the roadway. That leaves the seawall for people on foot, and that all that makes sense. And some were like, why don't we close it to vehicles after the pandemic's over? And people are like, can you imagine the camp that would set up in there? Can you imagine? Like, the camps are not the answer. We've got to find a different way to support. Like, aren't we fortunate right now, if that's the appropriate term, that hotels are so empty that we can staff with the appropriate support for those who need a hand. And certainly pulling people out of poverty needs to be a priority. The fact that it took a pandemic to get us to this seems odd. Yeah. So something's broken.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think that eventually we're going to have a very honest conversation about these issues. And there are people from the right and the left that both need to kind of give their heads a shake, because not everyone's being honest about all the problems at play here. You mentioned the people that you know, that have publicly said they think that camping outside is a form of protest and that they should be allowed to do it wherever they want. That doesn't work. But equally, you see voices from people that say, you know, who cares? They should all just get a job. Well, it's not that simple. No. Is the most charitable way of reacting to that. But
it's wild watching people, the polarization of opinion on how to fix a very constant problem. And having done numerous, you know, plenty of plates, I wrote about it in the Orca a couple of times actually, and what it's like when you go to the downtown east side and you don't look at it as a war zone, as a drug haven, and you actually go in thinking, I'm going to try and help feed some people, because there are a lot of people here who are struggling, have their medication, but their medication is meant to be taken with food, and they have no food, so they don't take their medication and they get sicker. So what can we do to feed people? Like, we just start somewhere, try anything. But you were saying in our pre-podcast meeting that I kind of feel like we're bailing out
a leaky canoe. That's true. Eventually you got to plug the hole.
Eventually we've got to figure out where the problem is. And I think that comes with the supports, or what's being floated now. I'm curious as to your opinion on this, is giving everybody a living wage. Like,
I have not come to a conclusion on that, to be totally honest.
Nor have I.
I'm open to considering it. I am. because I do think that there is an argument to be made that it might actually be cheaper when you figure everything in. Might. But I'm also open to the argument that it would be an unmitigated disaster.
Could be a disaster too. But we all thought that, you know what, delivering alcohol to your home would be an unmitigated disaster. And that's been happening since the lockdown. You can get a 6-pack of beer with your White Spot burger, and everything's fine. Yeah.
And you know what? Some of the objections to both those things are similar in that, well, there'll be a small number of people who abuse it.
No doubt.
There's a small number of people who abuse pretty much everything right now. Is that an argument for the rest of us not being able to? I mean, think of the people that can't gamble responsibly, can't drink responsibly. Does that mean we shut down pubs and casinos and online gaming? No, it means you help people who need it and maybe restrict access, but it doesn't mean it's a blank, well, we can't do that. No one can ever do that again.
I think it would be unbelievable to have mental health support be covered. Kind of like dental and optometrists. Like, all of your head should be covered.
Your whole head.
Your whole noggin up front, in here. If we could support people, the most vulnerable wouldn't become the most marginalized, you know, and that's just a part of it. But maybe some would, as you said, there's always going to be this niche and sometimes a very loud group that will be the troublemaker or the conspiracy theorist.
Yes.
Oh, Lordy, have mercy.
One of my favorite subgroups of people on Twitter are the conspiracy.
You see me there, don't you? You do.
Yes, I do.
I find it very difficult. I had an issue with a friend of mine who shall remain nameless. Mm-hmm. She's awesome. I love her. But she loves a conspiracy theory and put up that Plandemic, the movie thing. Yeah. And I DM'd her and I'm like, that's dangerous. It's dangerous. And she's like, what's dangerous about it? You see, seeing it from all sides. I'm like, but that's not a side. It's like the anti-vaxxers. The anti-vaxxers who, when there is a COVID-19 vaccine, will take it.
Yeah.
You know? And I had somebody react to a post. It was Sam Cooper. We all know and love Sam Cooper, right? Global news investigative journalist, treasure in Canada, particularly in BC. He was the one who blew the lid off the casino money laundering and the fentanyl connections. He blew the lid off of our housing market being used basically like stocks, and why. So he has written an article. It was yesterday, I believe it was Wednesday that it came out, and it was about how shockingly how many Canadians, if you ask them about COVID-19, what causes it, what are the symptoms, what happens to you, what is it like, da 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 da, most will give you at least one, if not more, erroneous conspiracy theory rooted facts. And it stopped me in my tracks. I don't know. What do you do with conspiracy theorists?
It depends on the kind of conspiracy, to be totally honest with you.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact percentage, but it's somewhere around like 15 to 20% of Canadians think 9/11 was an inside job. That's true. And so, I mean, there are a lot of people that believe things like this. And I think everyone has like an Uncle Dave or an Aunt Doris that they love, but also believe something crazy. And the other thing I will say is that conspiracy theory is a pretty broad category. There are people who think that the aliens built the pyramids. That's a conspiracy. But there are also people who say things like, well, I think that the government of China, less than forthcoming and honest on several aspects of COVID-19. Is that a conspiracy theory? No, I don't think so.
No, I think that's a fact.
Yeah, but there are those who would categorize that as a conspiracy because it sounds conspiratorial. But
they might, a conspiracy theorist would take that China's not forthcoming. Yes. Hello, this just in. And then attach the World Health Organization, who is trying to find out. I remember watching those early health briefings. I don't know the inside of this deeply enough. I don't think the World Health Organization should be investigating its response by itself. Like it should be somebody independent. And how about they do it after? Because we need to focus on what we're doing right now. But watching those early briefings, and I wish I could remember the one scientist, the one doctor I want to say it's Dr. Hay. It's a blonde gentleman. I think he has an Irish or Scottish.
Oh, I know who you mean, but I also don't remember his name. I'm sorry.
But he's the one that is like, I don't care what they're all saying right now. You need to be ahead of this. If you're not ahead of it, you're late. And if you're late, you die. Yeah. And like he's that guy, because while they were all like, China's being great, we're going to get into China. And because what they were trying to do is gain access to China to find out what the hell was going on. Mm-hmm. And then we watch it bounce around the globe. And now we see Dr. Theresa Tam, our Canadian health officer, just being attacked. Like it's really awful to watch. I see her every morning at the First Minister's briefings, and every day she gets paler and more frail, like she's just being broken, like as if the weight of the world wasn't already on her shoulders. Can you judge her later? You know, and then painting everybody with one brush. So anybody who's ever been associated with anything with the World Health Organization that's conspiracy. And I'm like, I'll give you 3 words right now: Dr. Bonnie Henry. And they're like, oh, right, no, she's good.
Yeah, I mean, I've been confronted with conspiracy theories a lot of my working life and in previous careers in government. You're accused of a lot of things if you ever work in government, and some of them are kind of crazy. I mean, I've been called a puppet of Jim Pattison before. I've never met Jim Pattison. I have no idea what he thinks about stuff.
Those are long strings.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but I mean, these are the kinds of things that emerge every day. You ask what I do with conspiracy theories. If I think a conspiracy theory, someone has arrived at it just based on some bad information or some bad conclusions, and I think it's arrived at in good faith, if that makes sense, then yes, I will try and engage and explain. But if it's your tinfoil, you know, every person who's ever met this person is a zombie, and I ignore a lot on social media these days.
I'm hitting mute if I don't know them. Or I'm hitting block if I don't know them. If they're random and they've got 0 friends, followers, whatever, I'm like, okay, troll, bye. But if it's somebody that I know and I understand where they might be getting that sort of shift of, I want to know everything I can find out, then I start sending them like reputable news sources. Like that's the key, is you've got to double check, do your due diligence. If you see that thing and it makes you go, oh my God, make sure you can find that at least a couple of other places. Yeah. Last but not least, speaking of, you know, due diligence, good sources, and news organizations, the Orca.ca, where Maclean K does the Fin, the newsletter that happens, it just arrives in my inbox magically on weekday mornings. I love it. Thank you for getting up early for me. I try and tell all of my friends to tell at least one person a day to check out the Fin, because we need to be engaged in local. And my column this week, my middle this week, trying to find the middle on things, very, very local, because it's about, and very personal, really, for both you and I. Back to school. How do you feel about back to school, June 1st?
Feeling very mixed. We weren't sure if our son is 5 and he's in preschool. He will, I guess, apparently start kindergarten in September. He hasn't been in preschool for quite some time. We've been told he can go back on June 1st. He's part of the first wave of kids they're going to let back in.
2 days a week, right?
No, 5.
It's, 5 days a week.
5 days a week.
Wow.
Yeah, it's preschool. It's not school.
Oh, right.
And they can spend most of the time outside. Just running around. Look, are we a little worried about a little extra risk? Yes. That said, Vancouver Island has been incredibly safe in terms of COVID-19. We know that we have been bending over backwards to be safe. We have great faith in the facility itself and the people who run it. And also, I mean, a kid can't stay inside all summer. He just can't. I'm going to get emotional if I talk about this too much, but like, the kid needs to run and play outside. And I am kind of happy to let him go there and do that, because he can't do that here. And I think I'm not sure if my wife will start work until July, so that we have like a buffer month to make sure everything's good. Because they've also said if they had display any symptoms of anything whatsoever, they'll get sent home. He's 5, he has sniffles every day.
Right.
So we'll see how rigid they are about that. And I wouldn't blame them if they're completely rigid. So we're going to need a month to sort of test drive, and then we'll see how the summer goes, and then we'll see how kindergarten goes.
Right. And the test drive part is really important, because we're all test driving what things are going to look like 3 short months from now, when we're still going to be in a very similar situation, except for it's going to be pouring rain and then dark at 4:30. So, you know, I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer here, but we got to make hay while the sun shines. We got to get outside. Outside, as Dr. Bonnie has said, is the safest place for us to be. Just so from my perspective, my son's 12, so he's in grade 7. He is going to be saying goodbye to his elementary school. I actually pulled him out of school a little early at March break because I didn't think he necessarily needed to be there for the few last days before March break. And in our jobs, we kind of get the, something ain't right.
Yeah.
So I pulled him a little early, asking his teacher. As I reflect in the column, I've left it up to him.
Yeah.
Just to gauge his comfort. If he could give up online learning and just go to school 1 day a week for 4 weeks, he was down. I'm like, that's not happening, but his dad really wants him to go. So I think he's going to go. Am I afraid of the risk? No. I trust the schools. Yeah. I do. I trust that the schools wouldn't be opening if there was a huge risk. I believe that we're more Denmark than London.
Yes, I agree.
So,
I think the numbers back that up.
I think they do. Hey, this was really fun. It went by too fast.
It did. Are we done? Oh my
God. That's it. That's it. That's all.
Yeah. Sorry, George. Been replaced. Oh, yeah.
Anytime, Maclean. I'm just telling you, because when you can 007 off the top.
I should have done it with the Sean Connery accent. That'll be next time.
Oh, next time.
Months from now, whenever that is. And then the time after that, Roger Moore, and then all the way down the line.
Every single time. I love it. We have our own thing. That is Maclean K. He is the editor-in-chief of the Orca. I highly recommend that you follow the Orca on all of your social media, specifically on Twitter. It's very good. And you go to theorca.ca and you sign up for the Fin. We do not sell, use, or disseminate your information in any way. It's just so you can stay engaged on local politics and that curated list of things we must read every day from all publications in British Columbia is vital always. So thank you for everything you do. And thanks for doing this.
My pleasure. We'll do it again soon.
Go eat lunch.
Yes.